Welcome to the Universal Rainbow Faith Blogcast, where spiritual truth, reflection, and transformation come to life.
So imagine an employee walking into a corporate HR department,
Okay, yeah, I'm picturing it.
and they are currently being penalized for their gender presentation. Maybe they're facing like a formal write-up for wearing clothing that violates a really strict traditional company dress code.
Right, which is unfortunately a pretty common scenario.
Exactly. And the usual script for this scenario involves the employee citing the HR handbook or, pointing to corporate diversity statements, or perhaps just begging for a baseline level of tolerance from their boss.
Yeah, just hoping for some understanding.
But instead of doing any of that, this employee slides a formalized, legally binding 501c3-backed religious mandate right across the desk.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. They aren't asking for a civil rights accommodation. They're demanding a First Amendment religious protection. They're essentially telling their employer that their gender expression is a legally untouchable divine sacrament.
It fundamentally changes the entire legal battlefield.
It really does. Today, we are looking at how a grassroots movement is attempting to completely reverse engineer the American culture wars.
Because for decades, the American public has been conditioned to view religious freedom laws as a mechanism utilized primarily by traditional Orthodox institutions.
Right, we see in the news constantly.
Exactly, like a private business refusing a service, or a state legislature prioritizing a specific religious worldview over secular anti-discrimination statutes. The framework is just deeply entrenched.
Yeah, that's what we expect.
But what we're examining today is the exact opposite application of that legal plumbing. It's a calculated, highly strategic pivot from fighting for secular civil rights to claiming divine, constitutionally protected rights.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Wow.
We are undertaking an exhaustive, really granular exploration of the founding and the legal architecture of a brand new organization called the Universal Rainbow Faith, or the URF.
And the stack of sources we are unpacking today is honestly one of the most unique and legally provocative collections of documents we've ever seen.
It's wild. We have the official Nevada Secretary of State business filings. We have the literal IRS tax exemption receipt.
Our literal receipts.
Yes. We have the internal church bylaws, specifically the Global Church Edition. We have template religious exemption letters designed to be deployed in public schools and corporate workplaces. And we even have the foundational March 2025 blog post that, launched this entire movement into the public sphere.
These documents, they provide a complete anatomy of how a modern religion is constructed from the ground up.
Yeah.
We are looking at the intersection of deeply held spiritual belief and just aggressive bureaucratic maneuvering. It is basically a masterclass in utilizing existing institutional frameworks to force legal recognition.
But before we go any further into the mechanics of this, we really need to issue a very clear, crucial impartiality disclaimer to you, the listener.
Absolutely necessary.
The source material we are unpacking today contains highly politically charged content. These documents directly address divisive domestic legislation, intense cultural issues, and the ongoing culture wars regarding gender identity, medical care, and sexuality.
Which are huge flashpoints right now.
Huge. So we want to make it absolutely crystal clear that neither of us are taking sides in this debate. We're not endorsing any left-wing or right-wing political viewpoints.
Right.
We are not here to validate or invalidate the Universal Rainbow Faith's theological beliefs or, predict their ultimate legal success. Our sole mission today is to impartially report on the factual contents of the provided documents.
Just the facts of what's on the paper.
Exactly. We are here to help you understand the exact ideas, the legal frameworks, and the precise strategies contained in this original source material so you can see how this specific group is attempting to navigate the law.
And that neutrality is essential because the strategy itself is so complex. We are essentially analyzing the blueprint of a constitutional Trojan horse here.
A Trojan horse, yeah. That's a good way to put it.
To understand how the URF operates, we have to look objectively at how they are layering modern queer identity inside the impenetrable outer shell of IRS tax codes and First Amendment case law.
So let's start with the foundation. Because before a movement can issue religious exemptions or challenge a corporate HR department, it has to exist on paper.
It needs an origin point.
Right. And in our sources, that origin point is beautifully documented in March of 2025. It is a chronological masterclass in launching a modern faith.
Because it doesn't start with a revelation on a mountaintop.
No, it starts with digital real estate.
Exactly. Specifically, 2 foundational blog posts published on March 10th, 2025 by the church's founder, Paula Sadler.
And when you analyze these initial posts, what really stands out is the deliberate construction of the organization's tone.
Yeah, before they introduce any of the heavy legal mechanisms, they establish this profound sense of sanctuary.
The first post is titled Discover Sacred Teachings, and it's incredibly welcoming.
It really is.
The language asks the reader if they've ever felt called to explore their spirituality in a space that is genuinely inclusive. It explicitly positions the Universal Rainbow Faith as a beacon of light and love in the online religious community.
It's a very soft open.
Yeah, it's telling a historically marginalized demographic, hey, here's a safe harbor where you don't have to check your identity at the door.
But then that emotional framing is immediately followed by a pivot to logistics.
Oh yeah, the very same day.
Right. On that exact same day, March 10th, a second post goes live titled Embrace Unity. Join our online faith community today. This is where the digital infrastructure is introduced.
They don't waste any time.
Not at all. The post outlines online membership applications, virtual events, systems for digital donations, and pathways for online ordination.
So it takes the lofty spiritual promise of the first post and routes it right through the user interface of a modern, scalable digital organization.
They are telling the audience that the cathedral isn't a brick-and-mortar building in a specific city. The cathedral is universalrainbowfaith.org.
But here is the friction point. You can't just, throw up a Squarespace site, publish 2 blog posts, and call yourself a legally protected religion.
No, the United States government definitely requires a paper trail.
And that brings us to the actual receipts in our source stack. On March 20, 2025, which is just 10 days after those welcoming blog posts, the official paperwork is filed with the Nevada Secretary of State.
Specifically with Francisco Villaguar.
Right. And the contrast between the mystical language of the blog posts and the stark administrative reality of the state filings is just fascinating.
It's all right there in black and white.
We have the itemized work order receipt. It outlines exactly what it costs to legally birth a religion in Nevada.
And it's shockingly cheap.
It is. There is a $50 fee for the Articles of Incorporation for a domestic nonprofit corporation. There's another $50 fee for the initial list of officers. And then there is a specific $0 fee for the exemption from charitable solicitation.
So for a grand total of $100, the legal entity exists.
It's $100. And the initial list officially names the board of directors headquartered out in Las Vegas. We got Paula Sadler as president, Stephen Nealand as treasurer, and Tanya Pazos Valles as secretary.
But they don't stop at the state level.
No. The pacing of these filings is incredibly aggressive. 4 days later, on March 24, 2025, our sources show a transaction receipt from pay.gov, which is the U.S. federal government's payment portal.
It's a $600 payment made via a Visa card to the Internal Revenue Service.
Which is the user fee for Form 1023.
Right. And Form 1023 is the application for recognition of exemption under Section 501c3. This is basically the holy grail for any nonprofit or religious organization.
It's a huge deal to get that.
It is. It is a rigorous process where the IRS scrutinizes the organization's governing documents, its planned activities, its financial structure to ensure it actually qualifies as a legitimate tax-exempt entity and not just, a tax shelter.
Now, included in these IRS documents is an expedited handling request. It's a letter written by Paula Sadler directly to the IRS, begging them to speed up the 501c3 approval process.
And normally organizations ask for expedited processing because they have a massive pending donation that relies on tax-exempt status, or maybe they are providing emergency disaster relief.
Right, something super urgent. But the reason Sadler gives here is entirely rooted in modern digital strategy.
She explicitly tells the IRS that the URF needs its 501c3 status immediately so the church can begin utilizing Google Ad Grants.
Wait, Google Ad Grants?
Yeah. For context, Google runs a program where they provide massive advertising grants, sometimes up to $10,000 a month in free search ads, to officially recognized 501c3 nonprofits.
Wow.
Sadler argues that to fulfill their charitable mission of creating an inclusive faith community, they desperately need this grant to expand their digital outreach.
Think about how savvy that is. They're utilizing federal tax codes to secure Silicon Valley advertising grants to acquire members.
It's brilliant.
The spiritual vision of this church is entirely dependent on the legal and digital scaffolding. Without that $600 IRS filing, you don't get the official federal recognition. Without the federal recognition, you don't get the Google Ad Grant.
Right.
And without the Google ad grant, some marginalized kid in a rural town might never find your website.
It is a perfect integration of faith and modern logistics. They understand that in the 21st century, establishing a religion requires mastering bureaucratic systems. The $100 Nevada filing and the $600 IRS fee are the mechanisms that make the theology legally actionable.
So let's talk about that theology.
Yeah.
Because filing papers with the state of Nevada doesn't grant you immunity. A corporate entity needs a doctrine.
It needs the codified rules of the faith.
Exactly. And that leads us into the internal bylaws and the Articles of Incorporation. This is where the Universal Rainbow Faith takes its core beliefs and translates them into a legal framework.
And the language chosen in these governing documents reveals the entirety of their legal strategy. Our sources include the Global Church edition of the URF bylaws.
Okay, let's get into it.
If you look at Article 1, Section 2, which outlines the church's purpose, it goes far beyond simply stating, support for the LGBTQIA plus community.
Right. It's not just a mission statement.
No. It explicitly codifies the right of individuals to express their gender identity, their personal appearance, their dress, their makeup, their hairstyles, and their pronouns as fundamental religious practices.
Let me stop you there, because we really need to unpack how wild that is. They're taking something that society currently debates as a cultural issue or a psychological identity, like the use of specific pronouns or gender-affirming clothing, and legally defining it as a fundamental religious practice.
Yes, they are establishing a paper trail of sacredness.
And the Articles of Incorporation, the actual document filed and registered with the state, pushes this concept even further into specific cultural and medical practices.
Let's look at Article 2, Section 9. It officially defines drag performance and gender-based artistic expression as sacred rituals. It explicitly names public drag events, specifically including Drag Story Hour, as forms of religious celebration.
Wait, hold on. You can't just slap the word sacrament on a public artistic performance and magically bypass local ordinances, right? I mean, if a city council tries to ban drag performances in public spaces, how does a church defining it as a sacred ritual in a Nevada corporate filing override the city council?
Well, this is where we have to dive into how the First Amendment is actually litigated in the United States.
Okay, lay it on me.
Under U.S. constitutional law, courts are generally prohibited from evaluating the validity or the truth of a religious belief. A judge cannot sit on the bench and declare, well, the Catholic use of communion wine is a valid sacrament, but your drag performance is just secular art.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the government is entirely unequipped and legally forbidden to act as a theological gatekeeper.
So the courts can't judge if the religion is real or correct. What can they judge?
They can only evaluate the sincerity of the belief. Is this belief sincerely held by the individual claiming the protection? Have they demonstrated that this practice is central to their deeply held spiritual framework?
Ah, I see.
By putting these specific marginalized expressions directly into their foundational legal documents, the bylaws and the Articles of Incorporation, the URF is manufacturing undeniable, documented proof of sincerity.
Yeah.
So they are legally forcing the state to treat modern gender expression with the exact same hands-off First Amendment deference as it treats observing the Sabbath or keeping a kosher diet.
Exactly.
That is a staggering legal pivot. They're taking the exact legal mechanism that historically protects Orthodox traditions and aiming it directly at modern queer identity.
And the Articles of Incorporation take this all the way to bodily autonomy in medicine.
Right. Article 2, Section 6?
Yeah, it classifies gender-affirming medical care as sacred religious sacraments. It explicitly lists puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, and related procedures.
That's incredibly specific for a church document. It states this protection extends to minors with parental consent, and it claims that any licensed professional or school nurse assisting in this care is performing a protected religious act.
They are drawing a direct parallel line between taking a hormone therapy pill and taking Holy Communion. Both, according to this church's constitution, are untouchable religious sacraments.
And in Article 11, they make this comparison totally explicit. They point out that existing legal frameworks already protect religions that reject blood transfusions or organ transplants based on deeply held doctrine.
Like Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. The URF is simply claiming the inverse, that accessing specific medical care is an intrinsic expression of their faith.
I can hear listeners screaming at their speakers right now. If a state legislature passes a law explicitly banning hormone replacement therapy for minors, a church can't just wave a wand, yell sacrament, and ignore the state law, right? That has to trigger a massive legal collision.
It absolutely triggers a collision, and the URF's own internal documents show they are acutely aware of the danger.
Yeah, we have that incredibly revealing internal document in the source stack dated April 30, 2025.
The internal audit.
Right, an internal audit conducted by the church's treasurer, Steve Neeland, reviewing these initial policies.
Neeland is doing the unglamorous, necessary work of a board member here. He combs through the documents and flags a bunch of administrative housekeeping.
Yeah, mismatched article numbers, missing definitions for the vice president and secretary roles, stuff like that.
But point number 4 of his audit is the absolute linchpin. He flags what he calls strong claims around medical procedures as religious rights.
So he saw the risk.
Oh, clearly. Neeland acknowledges the power of defining gender-affirming care as a sacred act, but he throws a massive red flag. He warns the board that this specific claim will be intensely controversial and heavily scrutinized by the IRS and local legal jurisdictions.
He is essentially telling them, look, if we claim that providing medicine is our religious duty, the state might accuse us of practicing medicine without a license.
Or the IRS might revoke our tax-exempt status for violating public policy.
So what is the fix? How do they maintain the religious protection without getting shut down by the medical board?
Neeland recommends adding a very specific legal buffer. He advises the board to explicitly state in the bylaws that the Universal Rainbow Faith does not practice medicine.
Oh, that's more.
The church must affirm that they adhere to all existing legal and medical consent laws and that they rely entirely on licensed secular medical professionals to perform the procedures.
So they have to assert divine protection over the believer's right to seek the care without claiming to be the authority dispensing the care.
Exactly. It is a brilliant, delicate tightrope walk.
Okay, so the URF has built this bulletproof legal doctrine in a filing cabinet in Nevada. They've navigated the IRS, they've defined their sacraments, they've built their legal buffers. But a doctrine sitting in a filing cabinet does nothing for a teenager in a hostile school district or an employee dealing with a discriminatory manager.
Right, it has to be applied.
How does this actually get weaponized in the real world?
That brings us to the most aggressive, intangible part of the URF's strategy, which is the official Religious Exemption Letters.
Yes.
These are highly formalized, templated documents provided by the church for their members to hand directly to their employers or school administrators.
We have two specific templates in our sources: the official Religious Exemption Letter for student protections and the official Workplace Religious Exemption Letter.
And reading through these, they are not polite requests.
Not at all. They don't read like a doctor's note or a therapist's recommendation. They are written as legal demands.
They invoke the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act right in the opening paragraph.
And the lists of required accommodations are super comprehensive. In both the workplace and student letters, the URF demands the use of the individual's chosen name and correct pronouns, framing this not as a courtesy, but as an expression of sacred identity.
They demand the freedom to wear gender-affirming clothing and makeup, access to gender-aligned restrooms, and explicit protection from being dead-named.
They also demand the freedom to display URF religious symbols. They specify that wearing a rainbow pin or a rainbow badge is a protected religious insignia.
And this is huge. The letters also assert that the right to engage in or attend drag performances, whether as a performer or an audience member in your private time, is protected because drag is a legitimate form of spiritual expression.
So if you fire someone because they went to a drag show on the weekend, you're technically firing them for attending a religious service.
Yeah, exactly.
And they expand this protection into scheduling, too. The letters notify the institution that members require accommodations for officially recognized URF holy days.
Right. They list Transgender Day of Visibility on March 31st.
LGBTQ plus Pride Month in June.
National Coming Out Day on October 11.
And Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 20.
They are taking what society usually considers secular cultural awareness days and elevating them to the exact legal status of Good Friday or Yom Kippur.
Let's walk through the mechanics of what happens when one of these letters actually hits the desk of an in-house corporate lawyer or a public school superintendent, because the letters explicitly warn that denying these accommodations constitutes spiritual discrimination and a violation of constitutionally protected religious rights.
That's a heavy threat.
What does that corporate lawyer actually have to do when they read that?
Well, the lawyer immediately has to evaluate the threat under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
Title VII is the federal law that prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. But regarding religion, Title VII goes a step further. It mandates that employers must reasonably accommodate an employee's sincerely held religious beliefs unless doing so causes an undue hardship on the business.
Okay, what exactly constitutes an undue hardship? Because if I'm a hostile employer, I might just say, well, accommodating these pronouns disrupts my team, so it's a hardship. Denied.
It used to be easier to claim that. Historically, the Supreme Court defined undue hardship as requiring an employer to bear more than a minimal cost. However, recent Supreme Court rulings have actually strengthened religious protections, making it much harder for employers to deny accommodations.
Oh, interesting.
To prove undue hardship now, the corporate lawyer has to prove that letting an employee wear a rainbow pin or use a specific pronoun causes a substantial burden in the overall context of the employer's business.
Which is almost impossible to prove mathematically. I mean, how do you prove to a judge that a pronoun bankrupts a company?
You basically can't, and that is the genius of the legal judo the URF is using. By taking what is normally framed as a cultural dispute over gender identity and transforming it into a formal dispute over religious discrimination, they force the employer onto incredibly unfavorable legal terrain.
Right.
If an HR department fires an employee for violating a traditional dress code, the employee isn't just claiming discrimination based on gender identity, which, it can vary wildly in protection from state to state.
Yes, some states have zero protections for that.
Exactly. But now they are claiming federal religious persecution. That elevates the risk profile for the company astronomically. Companies are terrified of Title VII religious discrimination lawsuits because juries historically favor individual religious liberty.
It's fascinating because the URF is recognizing that civil rights legislation is slow, highly politicized, and constantly under threat. But religious rights, the First Amendment is the absolute bedrock. It's almost untouchable.
Yep.
Which leads to a really profound question about the necessity of this entire endeavor. I mean, why build a brand new 501c3 church from scratch? There are thousands of progressive LGBTQIA plus affirming churches across the country.
Oh, tons of them.
You can find an affirming Methodist or Episcopal congregation in almost every major city. Why not just join an existing church that hangs a pride flag out front?
The source material addresses this exact question in a dedicated document titled Why the Universal Rainbow Faith is Needed Now.
Okay, what's their argument?
The URF outlines a historical, sociological, and theological justification for its existence. The first core argument is about historical religious exclusion. They point out that the vast majority of traditional world religions have historically marginalized queer people, forcing individuals into this heartbreaking binary choice. You can have your faith, or you can have your authentic identity, but you cannot have both.
Yeah, that's a painful reality for a lot of people. And the document critiques not just traditional religion, but also the secular LGBTQIA plus rights movement itself.
It does. It argues that over the last 50 years, the queer rights movement focused almost exclusively on secular civil benchmarks.
Like marriage equality, healthcare access, housing protections, military service.
Right. And while those were vital, the movement entirely sidelined spirituality. They argue that society forced LGBTQIA plus identity into a purely secular box, ignoring the reality that gender diversity and diverse forms of love have always had a sacred component in human history.
Which leads directly to their argument about lost traditions. The URF text references ancient spiritual roles that existed long before Western colonization.
They specifically mention two-spirit people in indigenous cultures.
And hijras in South Asia.
Yes, androgynous priests in antiquity and various gender-bending shamans across global histories.
The URF argues these sacred lineages were systematically suppressed and erased by colonization and dominant religious persecution. They position the URF not as a modern invention exploiting a tax loophole, but as a genuine reclamation of ancient, stolen spiritual heritage.
They are saying, look, we didn't invent this to trick the IRS. We are using the IRS to protect something deeply ancient that belongs to us.
But the document also makes a very careful distinction between cultural identity and religious identity. It notes that joining the URF does not replace one's LGBTQIA plus cultural or social identity.
And this is a vital legal and sociological distinction. The text states, just like Jewish or indigenous people can be both a people and a faith, LGBTQIA plus individuals can hold religious and social identities simultaneously.
So they are layering a legally recognized, constitutionally protected religious identity directly on top of a marginalized social identity.
Exactly.
If you look closely at how this differs from traditional affirming churches, the doctrinal paradigm shift is massive. If you go to a progressive, affirming Christian church, their central focus is still the traditional text. the Bible, and their historical rights.
They are simply interpreting those texts in a way that allows queer people to participate.
Right. The traditional religion is the core. The queer person is the welcomed guest.
Yes.
The Universal Rainbow Faith completely flips that architecture. The URF makes the queer experience itself the central, sacred text. The identity is the religion.
They are no longer asking for a seat at someone else's religious table. They have built their own table. The wood it's made of is their own lived experience, and because they have filed the proper state and federal paperwork, the government is legally obligated to recognize that table as sacred ground.
So we understand the theology, and we understand the intense legal machinery humming beneath it. But how does this actually work for the individual listening right now?
Logistically speaking.
Right. If someone wanted to interact with this organization, what are the logistics? Our sources move into the mechanics of membership, ordination, and what the URF calls the urgency of now.
The URF source text is incredibly explicit that the time to join is right now. It specifically references the intense legislative battles anticipated in 2025 and 2026.
Yeah, the text states that religious freedom laws offer powerful protections when civil rights fall short.
They are pitching membership as an immediate legal substituary because they view secular civil rights as slow-moving targets that can be repealed by a single hostile court ruling or a change in political administration.
But religious rights.
Religious rights are constitutionally baked into the absolute foundation of the country.
And one of the most striking ways they formalize this membership is through highly specific, newly invented rituals. Our sources highlight a unique rite found in their teachings index, the URF name and pronoun ceremony.
We actually have documents referencing the issuance of official name and pronoun certificates.
Which is fascinating. If you look at this from a sociological perspective, it is a brilliant reframing of a painful process. For many transgender or non-binary individuals, legally changing a name or gender marker is a grueling, highly bureaucratic, and often humiliating secular process.
It involves court orders, paying fees, publishing your old name in newspapers, begging doctors for medical letters of approval. It's exhausting.
The URF takes that secular trauma and transforms it into a witnessed, holy rite.
By issuing a church-sanctioned name and pronoun certificate, they are providing spiritual and legal validation that exists completely independently of state approval.
It's an act of profound self-determination. The state might deny your updated driver's license, but your church has declared your true name a sacred, documented fact.
And the organization doesn't just want passive members. They actively want to create ministers. They want individuals out in the world legally empowered to perform these rites and claim these protections.
The path to becoming an ordained URF minister is outlined in our sources, and it is remarkably accessible. Let's break down the exact steps from the official ordination document.
Step 1.
Step 1. Complete a simple online application. The applicant must affirm the core beliefs and sacred doctrines of the Universal Rainbow Faith, committing to inclusivity and spiritual guidance. The document explicitly states there are absolutely no restrictions based on gender, sexual orientation, or background.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Step 2. Once the application is approved, the new minister receives an official digital ordination certificate.
And Step 3.
Step 3. For a small administrative fee, they can receive printed, physical ministerial credentials, along with a guide on how to register as a legally recognized marriage officiant in their specific state or county. I have to push back here, though, because if you're listening to this, you have to be thinking, is it really just a web form? Can someone really just go online, click a few boxes affirming a doctrine, pay a small fee, and suddenly have the immense legal authority to perform state-recognized marriages, or claim Title VII workplace protections as an official religious leader?
It sounds totally unbelievable.
It sounds like a massive loophole that the government would instantly shut down.
It does sound like a loophole, but it is actually the intended design of American religious freedom. This gets to the heart of the democratization of faith in the United States.
How so?
Under U.S. law, specifically shaped by the First Amendment and further bolstered by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the state cannot play gatekeepers to religious authority. The government cannot demand that a pastor attend a 4-year accredited seminary. They cannot mandate a standardized theological exam.
Because if the government decided what made a real minister, they would be establishing a state religion.
Precisely. The only test the government can apply is the sincerity of the belief. If the belief is sincerely held and the organization meets the basic nonprofit requirements of the IRS, an online ordination from the Universal Rainbow Faith carries the exact same legal weight as a credential from the Vatican or a rabbinical school.
It is the ultimate leveling of the playing field. They are using the extreme permissiveness of American religious freedom laws to arm a marginalized community with unquestionable, state-recognized legal credentials.
The URF document even anticipates the friction. It notes that if a local government agency refuses to recognize a marriage performed by a URF minister, it would constitute religious discrimination.
And the ministers could immediately file legal complaints on the First Amendment. They have thought of the counterattack to every legal block.
They have built a comprehensive, self-reinforcing legal and spiritual ecosystem. The theology justifies the state and federal filings. The IRS 501c3 status empowers the exemption letters, and those exemption letters protect the theology in the public square, forcing corporate HR departments and school boards to bow to Title VII protections.
It is a closed loop of constitutional armor.
It really is.
Which brings us to a moment of reflection. Let's recap the incredible journey we've taken through this source material. We started with exactly $100 worth of state filing fees in Nevada, a $600 IRS payment, and an expedited request to secure a Google ad grant.
Just basic administrative receipts.
From those mundane receipts, we have unpacked a highly sophisticated, airtight legal and spiritual framework.
You've seen exactly how an organization can legally codify modern gender expression, artistic performances like drag, and specific medical care as untouchable, sacred religious sacraments.
We've walked through the mechanics of how they design specific legal exemption letters to dare corporate institutions to violate their First Amendment rights, weaponizing Title VII in the process.
And we've seen how they justify all of this not as a cheap legal trick, but as a genuine, urgent reclamation of ancient spiritual traditions that were historically erased.
They have successfully taken the First Amendment, a tool historically reserved to protect traditional conservative institutions, and turned it into an impenetrable shield for marginalized identities. It is a profound evolution of how we understand civil rights strategy.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought, something for you, the listener, to mull over on your own.
Think about this.
If identity, self-expression, and bodily autonomy can be successfully codified into a recognized religion to gain First Amendment protections, what stops this blueprint from being replicated by everyone else?
That is the big question.
Could other marginalized communities look at the Universal Rainbow Faith and copy their exact legal architecture? Imagine neurodivergent individuals frustrated by slow, unaccommodating corporate HR processes, founding a faith where specific sensory environments or unique communication styles are codified as sacred religious requirements.
Right.
They could grant themselves instant Title VII workplace accommodations that a doctor's note could never secure. Or imagine patients seeking alternative medical autonomies or reproductive rights, creating a theology where bodily sovereignty is the central, legally untouchable sacrament.
The implications are endless.
By flipping the script on religious freedom laws, have we just witnessed the invention of a brand new, infinitely replicable constitutional Trojan horse? When the front door of secular civil rights legislation is locked by the state, do you just build a church, file an IRS Form 1023, and walk right through the constitutional side door?
Seems like you might.
The established legal framework of religious freedom is suddenly full of endless, radically disruptive possibilities.
I was never a mistake, never hidden by design. Before the world could name me, love had already called me mine. I learned to quiet